Irvin Mera was a 67-year-old professor admired for decades of academic excellence. And Emily Carter was a 25-year-old Canadian student chasing success far from home. But when their secret relationship crossed dangerous boundaries, fear and control took over, leading to a silent night on campus that ended with one life lost and a respected legacy forever destroyed. The professor had spent more than 4 decades inside university walls, slowly building a reputation that seemed unbreakable. At 67, he was considered a pillar of academic excellence, someone whose name carried weight not only on campus but across international scholarly circles. His published research was frequently cited, his lectures were carefully structured, and his discipline was legendary. Students described him as demanding but inspiring, a man who believed deeply in order, rules, and tradition. To many, he represented the ideal image of an accomplished scholar who had sacrificed personal comfort for knowledge and education. Outside the lecture halls, his life appeared modest and controlled. He followed the same routine every day, arriving early, leaving late, and keeping his office spotless. Awards and certificates lined the walls, silently telling the story of decades of achievement. Colleagues trusted him with administrative responsibilities, assuming his age and experience made him immune to poor judgment. He rarely spoke about his personal life, which only added to the perception that he was devoted entirely to academia. No one questioned his integrity, and no one looked closely enough to notice the emotional emptiness that had slowly grown within him. Beneath this calm exterior, however, time had begun to weigh heavily on him. Retirement loomed, relevance felt fragile, and the once admiring attention of younger scholars had started to fade. The campus that once energized him now reminded him of his age and limitations. He feared becoming invisible, replaced, and forgotten. That fear quietly shaped his actions long before anyone realized it. While the university saw a disciplined and respected professor, they failed to see a man struggling with loneliness, insecurity, and an unspoken desperation to feel powerful and desired again. The young student arrived from Canada with high expectations and a carefully planned future. At 25, she was at a turning point in her life, determined to prove herself in a competitive academic environment far from home. The university represented opportunity, independence, and the promise of a successful career. She adapted quickly to campus life, impressing her peers with her focus and intelligence. Professors noted her dedication, and she earned a reputation as someone who took her studies seriously and aimed high. Despite her confident appearance, she struggled with isolation. Being thousands of miles away from family and familiar surroundings left her emotionally vulnerable. The pressure to succeed weighed heavily on her, especially as a foreign student facing high expectations and limited room for failure. She spent long hours in libraries and labs, pushing herself beyond exhaustion. The need for approval and reassurance grew stronger with each passing week, shaping how she connected with those in positions of authority. She admired mentors who appeared experienced and stable, believing their guidance could protect her from mistakes and uncertainty. Academic success was not just a goal for her. It was a necessity tied to her identity and future security. She feared falling behind, disappointing those who believed in her, and losing the chance she had worked so hard to earn. These fears made her more trusting than she realized, especially toward individuals who offered attention and recognition. The campus environment slowly began to feel overwhelming rather than exciting. Deadlines, evaluations, and constant comparison with others created silent stress. While she remained outwardly composed, inwardly, she searched for reassurance and direction. That search placed her in close proximity to powerful figures who seemed capable of shaping her future. Unaware of the danger ahead, she believed discipline and dedication would keep her safe, not realizing their connection changed gradually, in ways that were easy to overlook at first. Academic meetings became more frequent and stretched longer than necessary. The focus slowly shifted from research goals to personal struggles and private emotions. The professor offered guidance that went beyond coursework, presenting himself as a source of stability and protection. The student, already under pressure and far from home, began to rely on that attention. What felt like support soon crossed into a forbidden territory neither openly acknowledged. The relationship was built in secrecy from the beginning. It existed in quiet corners of campus and carefully timed encounters that avoided notice. The professor understood the risk immediately. His career, reputation, and legacy were all at stake, and that awareness fed a constant sense of fear. At the same time, the secrecy intensified his sense of control and importance. He convinced himself that the situation was manageable, that his experience and authority could keep everything contained. For the student, the secret carried a different weight. She believed the connection offered security and academic advantage, even as unease crept in. The imbalance of age and power shaped every interaction, though she struggled to name it. She began to feel isolated from her peers, unable to share what was happening without risking judgment or consequences. The relationship that once felt reassuring slowly narrowed her world. As weeks passed, boundaries dissolved further. The professor became increasingly possessive, while the student felt torn between ambition and discomfort. Both were trapped by what they stood to lose if the truth emerged. The secrecy that had once protected them now fueled anxiety and mistrust. Each hidden moment tightened the grip of fear, turning what began as guidance into a dangerous entanglement that neither could safely escape. The atmosphere on campus began to shift in subtle but unsettling ways. Small changes in routine drew quiet attention, and patterns that once seemed ordinary started to feel unusual. The professor became more guarded, limiting his public interactions and carefully managing his schedule. He avoided informal gatherings and reduced his presence in shared academic spaces. This withdrawal, though unnoticed by most, created a quiet distance between him and his colleagues. The student, meanwhile, showed visible signs of strain. Her focus slipped, deadlines felt heavier, and her usual confidence wavered. Whispers surfaced without clear sources. Nothing was openly stated, yet the sense of being watched grew stronger. The student felt constant pressure, unsure whether her private actions were truly hidden. Ordinary campus spaces began to feel threatening rather than familiar. She altered her movements, avoided social settings, and isolated herself further, believing invisibility would protect her. Instead, the isolation deepened her anxiety. The professor's fear intensified as the possibility of exposure became more real. Every unexpected email, every administrative notice felt like a warning. He imagined investigations, professional disgrace, and the collapse of everything he had built. His need to control the situation grew stronger, pushing him toward decisions driven by panic rather than reason. The campus that once symbolized authority and achievement now felt unstable beneath his feet. The student sensed the shift as well. The relationship no longer offered reassurance. It became unpredictable, heavy with unspoken tension. Academic pressure collided with emotional stress, leaving her mentally exhausted. She began to question her safety and future, unsure where loyalty ended and danger began. As the semester progressed, stress tightened its grip on both of them. The secret they shared felt fragile, constantly at risk of breaking. What once existed quietly in the back. The tension between them reached a point where silence became unbearable. The relationship no longer followed any clear direction, only reacting to fear and uncertainty. The student felt increasingly trapped, sensing that her academic future and personal safety were no longer separate things. Every decision seemed risky, every step carefully calculated. She began to recognize how much control had slipped from her hands, and that realization filled her with dread. What once felt like guidance now felt like pressure closing in from all sides. The professor, on the other hand, was consumed by panic. Years of discipline and careful planning unraveled under the weight of possible exposure. He replayed worst-case scenarios repeatedly, imagining investigations, public disgrace, and the loss of everything that defined his identity. The idea of becoming a scandal frightened him more than the consequences of his actions. His thoughts grew darker, driven by the belief that his entire life's work stood on the edge of collapse. The balance between them shifted dangerously. Small changes in behavior carried heavy meaning, and every interaction felt charged with tension. The professor's need for control intensified as his fear deepened. He began to see the situation not as a shared secret, but as a threat he needed to manage. Rational thinking gave way to desperation, and boundaries that should have remained firm completely disappeared. For the student, uncertainty turned into alarm. She sensed that the situation was becoming unstable and unpredictable. The campus no longer felt like a place of learning, but a maze with no clear exit. She weighed her options in silence, knowing that speaking out could destroy her future, yet staying quiet felt equally dangerous. By the time the breaking point arrived, both were emotionally exhausted. Fear, ambition, and secrecy collided in a volatile mix. The choices made during this period were driven not by logic or morality, but by desperation. The night settled heavily over the campus, stripping it of its usual noise and movement. Most buildings stood dark, their hallways empty, their silence broken only by distant security lights and the hum of ventilation systems. Inside one academic building, events unfolded that would forever change the university's history. The isolation of the space created a sense of separation from reality, as if the outside world no longer existed. The situation escalated rapidly, driven by fear and loss of control rather than clear intention. Emotions that had been suppressed for weeks erupted without restraint. The professor, overwhelmed by panic and desperation, acted under the belief that his future was collapsing in front of him. Years of discipline and restraint gave way to impulse. The student, already emotionally exhausted, was caught in a moment she could not escape. What occurred inside the building was sudden and irreversible. By the time the violence ended, silence returned, heavier than before. The student lay lifeless, her future erased in an instant. The professor stood at the center of the destruction, confronted with the reality of what he had done. Fear replaced thought, and instinct took over. He left the scene, abandoning the campus that had once defined his identity. The darkness outside seemed to offer concealment, but it could not erase the truth. Morning revealed the horror. The discovery of the body sent shockwaves through the university. Classes were suspended, buildings were sealed, and authorities flooded the campus. What had been a private secret now became a public crime scene. Students and staff struggled to process how such violence could occur in a place built on knowledge and trust. The quiet academic environment transformed overnight into a symbol of tragedy. Behind locked doors and caution tape, investigators began piecing together the events of the night. The campus would never feel the same again, and the consequences of hidden power and the investigation moved quickly, driven by the shock and pressure surrounding the case. Authorities treated the campus as a controlled zone, collecting evidence from offices, hallways, and digital systems. What initially appeared to be an isolated act of violence soon revealed deeper layers. Records showed unusual patterns in meeting schedules, access logs, and email exchanges that raised immediate concerns. The professor's absence following the discovery only intensified suspicion, turning quiet doubt into focused scrutiny. As investigators examined electronic devices, the hidden relationship came into view. Messages revealed secrecy, emotional dependency, and growing tension. Timelines confirmed private meetings that violated academic protocols. What had been carefully concealed for months unraveled in days. Each discovery exposed how authority had been misused and how fear had shaped reckless decisions. The case shifted from a tragic mystery to a disturbing example of power imbalance and exploitation. Surveillance footage placed the professor near the scene during the critical hours. Forensic evidence further connected him to the building where the student was found. Attempts to distance himself only deepened the case against him. His respected image collapsed publicly as media coverage spread internationally. The university community struggled to reconcile the man they trusted with the evidence now emerging. The student's background was also examined closely. Investigators traced her academic journey, personal struggles, and sudden changes in behavior. It became clear that she had been under intense pressure long before her death. Her vulnerability and isolation painted a painful picture of someone caught in a situation she could not safely escape. As the facts aligned, the truth became undeniable. The crime was not random, nor was it sudden in origin. It was the result of secrecy, fear, and unchecked authority allowed to grow over time. The arrest marked the final collapse of a life built on reputation and control. The professor, once admired for wisdom and discipline, became a symbol of betrayal and abuse of power. His decades of academic achievement were overshadowed by a single act of violence that defined his legacy. Court proceedings exposed the full scope of his actions, leaving little room for sympathy. The university that once celebrated him now distanced itself, removing his name from programs, publications, and honors. The loss of the student echoed far beyond the campus. Her death sparked international attention and deep sorrow among those who recognized her potential. What could have been a promising future was reduced to case files and headlines. Memorials appeared quietly, reflecting grief and anger in equal measure. Her story became a painful reminder of how vulnerability can be exploited in environments meant to protect and educate. The university faced harsh scrutiny from the public and regulatory bodies. Policies were questioned, oversight failures exposed, and leadership forced to respond. New safeguards were introduced, aiming to prevent similar tragedies. Workshops on ethics, power imbalance, and student protection became mandatory. These changes, though necessary, arrived too late to save a life. The campus itself carried the weight of what had happened. Students and staff moved through familiar buildings with a lingering sense of unease. Trust and authority had been shaken, replaced by caution and awareness. The case entered true crime discussions as an example of how secrecy and fear can escalate into irreversible harm. In the end, the story left no heroes. Only lessons remained, written in loss and silence. A respected career ended in disgrace. A young life ended in violence, and an institution was forever changed. The tragedy stood as a warning that unchecked power and hidden relationships can destroy everything they touch.